Welcome to Crime Cases. We had been dealing with a bad mouse smell for several days. We thought it was because someone had put out poison, as is usually done. That terrible smell, that terrible smell, that terrible smell. By the way, we had the baseboards cleaned because we thought the smell was coming from there. We never imagined, I repeat, never imagined that such a helpful, humble, and serious young man would have such a problem. Incredulity was the only word on the minds of the residents of an area located at kilometer 7 on the main road RD2, commonly known as Sanchez Highway in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. A grim discovery had been made in the home of one of its residents, someone everyone considered a regular person, a bit grumpy, but with nothing to hide. Join us to uncover all the details of this case, the case of Jesús Cuevas. In the Dominican Republic, a Caribbean country often called Quisqueya, known for its beautiful beaches and the friendliness of its people, lived Jesús María Cuevas Peña. The media did not release much information about his family background or early years. All that is known is that he was the eldest of 4 siblings, always loving towards his parents and concerned for their well-being. Jesus was described by his family and friends as a charming, kind, attentive, polite person, always willing to help if someone needed it. In fact, he was a young man with social awareness, known to give free English classes to visually impaired people. It was known that Jesus graduated with a degree in law from the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo, and according to one of the references we found by the end of 2022, at 30 years old, he had a job he liked at a real estate company, and thanks to his good performance, it seemed he was about to get a well-deserved promotion. According to Ariel, one of his brothers, Jesus was very focused on progressing in life. He worked hard because he wanted to achieve a good level of financial well-being that would ensure his parents wouldn't have to worry about anything in their golden years. Perhaps due to this strict and focused life, at 30, he was still single and unattached. At the same company where Jesus worked, a man named Francisco Javier Garcia Quesada, 32 years old, also worked. They had a good relationship and even became partners to generate some additional income. Thus, besides their formal jobs, they had a side business of lending money, where, according to the reports, Jesus provided the capital, and Francisco handled dealing with the borrowers and negotiations. Francisco, known to his friends and neighbors as Anthony, was apparently very different from Jesus. At the time, he was separated from his wife, whose name was not disclosed. She had left him a year ago, leaving him in charge of their 3-year-old son. It was later learned that Francisco was somewhat violent. Some neighbors said it was not unusual to hear heated arguments and shouting in the couple's house before they separated. However, afterward, Francisco's house, located in the San Jose neighborhood, kilometer 7 of the Sanchez Highway, was visited by many children from that area because he had a computer and many children's video games that he allowed the neighborhood kids to enjoy. Contrary to the good time Jesus was experiencing, Francisco's life took a hard hit when he was fired from his job in mid-2022. The reasons for his dismissal were not reported by the media. It is assumed that from then on, Francisco and his young son depended on the money-lending business he had with Jesus, whose profitability was unknown. Everything changes overnight. With this backdrop, we arrive at Thursday, October 6, 2022. Nothing suggested that anything could disrupt not only Jesus' life, but that of his entire family and loved ones. That day, as usual, the young lawyer left his home for work and completed his workday without any issues. But he did not return home. Initially, the family was concerned and, of course, tried to contact him, but they did not panic. In fact, that night they went to bed hoping he would return home at some point. They thought he might have gone out with friends for a drink and that his phone might have run out of battery. This theory was fueled by the fact that Jesus' work clothes were in the dirty laundry basket, meaning that after leaving his office, they were informed he had not shown up for work. That day, his relatives tried to contact all of Jesus' usual friends to see if anyone had news of him or had seen him the previous night. but no one seemed to have any answers. They clung to the hope of a story they created in their minds without any real basis but possible. They thought that the night before, the real estate worker went out to celebrate, maybe had too many drinks, and fell asleep at a friend's house they didn't know about. When Friday ended, and still no word on the young man, Ariel decided that early on Saturday, October 8th, he would go to the police to file a report on his older brother's disappearance. And that's what he did. As the authorities began their search efforts, the family also made a significant effort to find Jesus. Flyers and posters were created with his photo and details, describing him as a man slightly over 6 feet tall and weighing about 160 pounds, last seen in the residential area where he lived. As we've seen in other cases, the disappearance of a loved one disrupts the lives of everyone around them. From that moment, the entire family focused on trying to find Jesus. His photo and details were spread across social media, and particularly, Ariel spared no effort to draw attention to his brother's case. The young man used every opportunity he had, whether in formal media, social networks, or any internet channel, to disseminate information about the strange disappearance, hoping someone might have news about the Cuevas' eldest son. Besides the obvious family interest, the enormous efforts of his relatives to find him had an additional reason: the high number of disappearances in the country. A report from the Center for Security and Defense Studies of the Global Democracy and Development Foundation indicated that between 2017 and 2022, 1,183 people were reported missing to the police, of which nearly 500 remained unaccounted for by the end of the assessment. By 2022, when Jesus went missing, there were 372 reported disappearances, more than one per day, and less than half of these people had been found. To Ariel, the problem was very clear. The Dickery has given us several cameras, and, well, it's one thing, the Dickery has so few. There are 10 more people, like 2 secretaries, a secretary and a psychologist. They don't have enough staff. The cameras that have been, for example, supporting us, basically, we, the relatives, have been helping to watch the cameras because they can't keep up. It should be clarified that the Dickery Ariel refers to is the Central Directorate of Criminal Investigations of the police. According to the report mentioned, several of those who did not return home suffered from some kind of mental problem. But regarding Jesus, his brother made it clear to the authorities that he did not suffer from any problem, depression, or distress that could lead him to voluntarily disappear or get lost by accident. Additionally, Ariel explained that his brother was an extremely cautious person who did not trust strangers at all. In fact, he was so careful about security that he would normally share his online location as a precaution whenever he went to a new place or out partying at night due to the situation in the country. As days passed, progress was minimal. The only confirmed image of Jesus that the family managed to obtain came from a surveillance camera at the La Serena Mall on Winston Churchill Avenue. A co-worker had dropped him off there after leaving the office to head home between 6 and 6:30 in the evening on Thursday, October 6th. But as we mentioned, Jesus' family was not the only one going through this anguish, and in mid-October, relatives of 126 missing people held a protest at the gates of the National Palace to raise awareness about the situation. In this initiative, which was covered in images by Listín Diario, the Cuevas family also participated, joining all the voices expressing their terrible anguish. The gathered people agreed that while the authorities had attended to their complaints, the lack of consistency and insufficient resources for investigations increased the chances that in the end, they would only find a corpse. Despite all the efforts, the days continued to pass without any clue about Jesus' whereabouts. However, that was about to change. Jesus appeared. But on November 3rd, 2022, the audio-visual media and social networks were filled with images of police working in a cordoned-off area, removing a blue water tank covered with a black plastic bag. The container had been found on the 3rd floor of a house at kilometer 7 of the Sanchez Highway. There lived Francisco, Jesus' friend and business partner. Jesús Cuevas, 30 years old, whose body was dismembered and subsequently placed in a plastic tank in a gruesome manner. The police reported that they had found Jesus' body after an intense investigation, supported by security camera footage and other actions they did not want to explain, but which allowed them to request a judicial order to search the house of the man who was immediately detained. While interrogations were ongoing, Jesus' remains were sent to the National Institute of Forensic Sciences for post-mortem exams to scientifically determine the cause of death and even estimate the date of the crime. Meanwhile, as expected with such an incident, the media flocked to the area where the terrible discovery was made to talk to the local neighbors. Thanks to the residents' accounts, it was known that since mid-October, Francisco's neighbors had noticed a nauseating smell that flooded the area and whose source was unknown. At first, they thought it might be a rodent infestation, but nothing confirmed that hypothesis. Urged to end the bad smell, the neighbors turned their attention to the area's septic tank, thinking it might be overflowing. Although they gathered to clean it, the work did not resolve the problem of the smell, whose source was finally discovered by the police on the night of November 13, 2022, after 28 days of searching for the young lawyer. The neighbors were shocked that in the days following Jesus' disappearance, they had seen Francisco entering and leaving his house several times. The man carried on with his life as usual and never showed any signs of worry or concern. Meanwhile, inside his home, where he lived with his 3-year-old son, he concealed the body of his former colleague, partner, and supposed friend. One of the residents of the area stated that while Francisco was being detained, she asked him what was happening, and he replied that he had made a grave mistake. When she insisted on knowing more, the detainee only said he was ashamed. As we saw at the beginning of this video, many residents could not believe that their kind neighbor, known as Anthony, could commit such an atrocity. However, several noticed a change in his behavior some time ago. He had started to limit video game use and warned the few who still visited his home that they were forbidden from accessing the bathroom and a locked room. Despite residents claiming they had never seen the victim in the area, it was confirmed that Jesus had visited Francisco's home multiple times. To the journalists' surprise, after Francisco's arrest, the crime scene remained open, allowing them to enter and show the general disorder of the house, including areas where coffee powder was scattered, possibly to mask the odor of the remains. Notably, there was no information on what happened to the detainee's young son. The media speculated wildly about the case. Sensational reports claimed the body was dismembered and organs removed. The motive was also subject to baseless rumors, particularly on social media, suggesting a romantic relationship between Francisco and Jesus. The forensic report ended these rumors, revealing the body was divided into 2 parts, placed in trash bags, and sealed in a blue tank with adhesive tape. Tools like a roller, a saw, and hammers were found and taken by the scientific police for analysis. According to the legal report, Jesus died from hemorrhagic shock caused by stab wounds to the chest, confirmed by Francisco, who admitted to the crime. The motive was clarified as financial. Jesus had lent Francisco a significant amount of money over nearly 5 months of unemployment. Francisco's refusal to repay led to an argument and the subsequent attack. One source presented Francisco's contradictory claim that Jesus owed him money, which seemed unreasonable given the circumstances. After the legal procedures, Jesus' remains were returned to his family and buried in San Jose de Ocoa, 170 kilometers from the Dominican capital, where the family was from. The body was laid to rest in a closed coffin amid grieving family, friends, and neighbors. After a local pastor's prayer, the remains were buried in the municipal cemetery, with attendees releasing white balloons to say goodbye. With the facts clear, only the judicial part remained to determine Francisco's fate, whether released on bail or kept in custody until sentencing. Charges were filed in 2 sessions because Francisco lacked a defender initially. The victim's family's lawyer, Juan Geraldo Aquino, thanked the media for highlighting the case, calling the crime indescribably grave. Childa Peña, an aunt of the deceased, used the media presence to urge an end to the unfounded rumors. She emphasized the seriousness of the case, focusing on Francisco's financial debts. The final hearing on November 7th saw the family lawyer stating that Francisco killed Jesus over a $2,000 loan intended for a business. Francisco attacked Jesus with 13 stab wounds while he sat in the dining room, then hid the body in a back room where it was found with a knife and tools. The judge ordered Francisco to remain detained for 3 months at the Najayo Men's Correction and Rehabilitation Center, allowing time for the prosecution to complete the investigation. The next court appearance was scheduled for February 2023. During this session, his pretrial detention was extended for another 3 months, the time needed for the prosecution to prepare for the final hearing. However, the awaited hearing, where the decision on this case would be made, was delayed much longer than expected. It finally took place on Friday the 15th in the Second Collegiate Court of the National District. Francisco Javier Garcia Quesada was found guilty of murdering and mutilating Jesús María Cuevas Peña and was sentenced to the maximum penalty in these cases, 30 years in prison to be served at the National Penitentiary. At the hearing, tears flowed freely among Jesus's relatives, who felt relieved that justice had finally been served, though they wished the sentence could have been longer. Without a doubt, no punishment in the world is sufficient. No penalty can bring the victim back to life or end the pain of their loved ones. In cases like this, the punishment is compounded by the frustration expressed by Ariel from the beginning, when he said the authorities were not even capable of addressing the case promptly. For this reason, the young lawyer's brother always advocated for the institutional strengthening of police and investigative bodies, as time typically works against the victim in disappearance cases. Regardless of the statistics and police considerations, we were struck by the fact that Francisco lived with his 3-year-old child for almost a month, just meters away from the lifeless body of his former colleague and partner, enduring the stench that permeated the entire neighborhood without showing the slightest public sign of being disturbed or affected. In this regard, a local media outlet consulted renowned psychiatrist Cesar Maya, author of several books and hundreds of articles, and former president of the Medical Association on several occasions. The specialist stated that under special circumstances, anyone can end another's life, but living with the body in one's home for so long suggests the presence of a psychopathic or sociopathic individual who feels no remorse, has no sense of guilt, and could coexist with the corpse. Beyond the cold police, judicial, or psychiatric analyses, there is the irremediable pain of a family that will never see their son's success. Jesús Cuevas was a good young man, according to all accounts, who had possibly ventured into the informal loan business to fulfill his desire to provide his parents with financial stability for the future. Unfortunately, in this process, he found only death at the hands of someone he considered his great friend. By the way, before we concluded, we wanted to clear up a curiosity that arose from one of the statements we heard about the lack of a term defining a parent who loses a child. It turns out the term does exist. According to the Royal Spanish Academy, it is huérfalo or huérfala, referring to a father or mother who loses a child.